In a small, quiet town in Texas, nestled between rolling hills and sprawling farmland, there was a hospital that served as the heart of the community. It wasn't a big city hospital with towering glass buildings or endless corridors buzzing with activity. Instead, it was a modest facility where everyone knew each other, the doctors, the nurses, even the patients who came through its doors. Among the staff, one name stood out: Nurse Emily Carter. Emily had been working at the hospital for nearly a decade. She wasn't just another nurse. She was the kind of person who made people feel seen, whether it was holding a patient's hand during a tough diagnosis, offering a warm smile to someone feeling scared, or simply remembering little details about their lives. Emily had a way of making her patients feel like they mattered. Her colleagues admired her dedication, and her patients often requested her by name. But what set Emily apart most was her deep sense of empathy, a quality that would soon put her at the center of an unexpected storm. One chilly evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, Emily found herself on duty in the emergency room. The night had been relatively calm until an elderly man named Harold Jenkins was wheeled in. Harold was a veteran who had served his country decades ago, but life hadn't been kind to him since. His body bore the scars of war, both visible and invisible, and he relied on medication to manage the chronic pain that never seemed to leave him. That night, however, Harold hadn't been able to refill his prescription because of bureaucratic delays. He had run out of pills days earlier, and the pain had become unbearable. As Emily approached Harold's bedside, she could see the exhaustion etched into his face. His hands trembled slightly, and his voice was weak as he explained his situation. Listening intently, Emily felt a pang of sadness. She had met many veterans over the years, and while their stories were different, their struggles often shared common threads: loneliness, frustration, and sometimes a sense of being forgotten by the system meant to support them. Harold's case tugged at her heartstrings more than usual. Maybe it was the way he spoke softly, almost apologetically, as if he didn't want to burden anyone. Or maybe it was the look in his eyes, a mix of pain and resignation. Knowing how dire the situation was, Emily decided to act. Without hesitation, she went to the hospital's supply cabinet and retrieved a few extra doses of the medication Harold desperately needed. She administered it carefully, ensuring he was comfortable and stable. As the medicine began to take effect, Harold's breathing slowed, and his tense expression softened. For the first time that night, he looked peaceful. Emily stayed by his side for a while, chatting gently to keep him company. Before leaving his room, she promised him she'd check in again later. What Emily didn't realize at the time was that her simple act of kindness would not go unnoticed. A colleague, passing by the supply cabinet earlier, had seen her take the medication. While Emily believed she was doing the right thing, helping a suffering man, the rules of the hospital were clear: no unauthorized use of supplies under any circumstances. When word reached the hospital administration the next morning, they acted swiftly. Emily was called into a meeting with the board, where she was informed that her actions constituted a violation of protocol. Despite her intentions, the decision was made to suspend her pending further investigation. The news hit Emily like a ton of bricks. She couldn't believe that her attempt to help someone in need had led to such severe consequences. Sitting alone in her car after the meeting, she stared blankly at the steering wheel, tears streaming down her face. How could this happen? She hadn't stolen anything for personal gain or harmed anyone. All she had done was try to ease the suffering of a man who had already given so much for his country. The weight of the suspension felt heavy, not just because of the financial strain it would cause, but because it made her question whether compassion still had a place in modern healthcare. Word of Emily's suspension traveled fast through the close-knit town. By lunchtime, whispers filled the hallways of the hospital, and by evening the story had spread across social media. Some people sided with the hospital, arguing that rules existed for a reason and that exceptions could lead to chaos. Others, however, rallied fiercely behind Emily, praising her selflessness and condemning the hospital for punishing someone who had acted out of pure goodwill. Protest signs began appearing outside the hospital gates, bearing messages like, "Compassion isn't a crime," and "Stand with our veterans." Strangers started sharing Emily's story online, tagging celebrities and public figures in hopes of drawing attention to the injustice. Among those following the unfolding drama was none other than Chuck Norris, the iconic martial artist and actor known for his tough guy roles and outspoken patriotism. Norris, who had long been an advocate for veterans' rights, happened to be visiting family in the area when he heard about Emily's plight. As he sipped his coffee at a local diner, scrolling through headlines on his phone, something about the story struck a chord with him. Here was a nurse, a woman who had dedicated her life to helping others, being penalized for showing mercy to a veteran. To Norris, it wasn't just about Emily. It was about the larger issue of how society treated its heroes and those who cared for them. By the end of the day, Norris had made up his mind. He couldn't sit idly by while a good person was punished for doing the right thing. Little did anyone know, his involvement was about to turn this local controversy into a national conversation, one that would challenge not only the hospital's policies but also the values of an entire community. The small Texas town, usually calm and uneventful, suddenly found itself at the center of a heated debate. Emily's suspension had struck a nerve, dividing the community into two distinct camps. On one side were those who supported the hospital's decision, believing that rules were put in place for a reason, and that bending them, even for noble causes, could lead to chaos. These individuals argued that exceptions like Emily's could set a dangerous precedent, opening the door for others to justify breaking policies whenever they felt it was the right thing to do. They emphasized the importance of accountability and maintaining order within the healthcare system, insisting that compassion couldn't come at the expense of professionalism. On the other side of the divide stood a growing number of people who viewed Emily's actions as a shining example of humanity in action. To them, her suspension wasn't just unfair, it was wrong on a deeper level. How could a nurse be punished for showing kindness to someone in desperate need? Harold Jenkins wasn't just any patient, he was a veteran who had sacrificed years of his life serving his country. For many residents, the story resonated personally, because they either knew veterans themselves or understood the struggles faced by those who returned home carrying both physical and emotional wounds. The idea that bureaucracy could outweigh basic human decency seemed absurd and infuriating to this group. As the days passed, tensions escalated. Outside the hospital, protesters gathered daily, holding signs and chanting slogans. Some brought folding chairs and thermoses of coffee, prepared to stay as long as it took to make their voices heard. Others handed out flyers to passers-by, urging them to join the cause. The protest grew larger with each passing day, drawing attention not only from locals but also from neighboring towns. News crews arrived, setting up cameras and microphones to capture interviews with passionate supporters. One elderly woman, clutching a sign that read "Heroes deserve heroes," tearfully recounted how her late husband, a veteran, had often struggled to receive proper care after returning from war. If Emily hadn't helped Harold, who would have, she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Her words echoed the sentiments of many in the crowd. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere was equally charged. Staff members whispered nervously in break rooms, unsure of where they stood on the issue. Some agreed with the administration's stance, fearing that leniency might encourage reckless behavior. Others sympathized with Emily, quietly admiring her bravery even if they didn't dare say so aloud. Patients, too, were affected by the controversy. Many expressed gratitude toward Emily, recalling moments when her kindness had made their difficult experiences more bearable. A few even wrote letters to the hospital board, pleading for leniency and praising her dedication. Despite the growing support, however, Emily remained suspended, her future uncertain. Meanwhile, social media played a pivotal role in amplifying the story far beyond the borders of the small town. Within hours of the news breaking, hashtags like "Why Justice for Emily" and "Dyke Shrink Support Our Veterans" began trending online. People from all corners of the country shared posts, memes, and heartfelt messages about the importance of compassion in healthcare. Veterans organizations joined the conversation, highlighting systemic issues that made accessing proper care difficult for former service members. Celebrities and influencers weighed in, using their platforms to call for change. Among these voices was Chuck Norris, whose involvement added a new layer of intrigue to the unfolding drama. Norris, known not only for his tough guy image, but also for his genuine commitment to veterans' causes, posted a statement on his official page. In it, he praised Emily's courage and condemned the hospital's decision, calling it a failure of leadership and morality. He urged his followers to stand with her and demand justice, while also pointing out the broader implications of the case. "This isn't just about one nurse," he wrote. "It's about whether we value compassion over paperwork, humanity over red tape. If we don't protect those who care for our heroes, what message does that send?" The post went viral almost instantly, garnering thousands of likes, shares, and comments. Fans flooded the comment section with messages of support for Emily, sharing personal stories of loved ones who had been neglected by the healthcare system. Others tagged local news outlets and government officials, demanding answers and action. The momentum was undeniable, and it quickly became clear that this was no longer just a local issue. It had ignited a national conversation about how society treats its most vulnerable populations. Back in the town, the impact of Norris's involvement was immediate and profound. Protesters cheered when they heard about his public endorsement, feeling emboldened by the knowledge that such a prominent figure was on their side. Local businesses began showing their support as well, with some restaurants offering discounts to anyone wearing a Stand With Emily shirt, and others donating proceeds from certain menu items to a legal fund set up for Emily's defense. Even children got involved, drawing pictures of nurses and veterans holding hands, which were then displayed in shop windows along Main Street. Despite the growing outcry, the hospital administration remained firm in its position, at least publicly. Behind closed doors, however, cracks were beginning to show. Board members reportedly argued among themselves, torn between adhering to policy and responding to mounting pressure. Some worried about the hospital's reputation, knowing that negative publicity could deter potential patients and donors. Others feared legal repercussions if they reversed their decision without addressing the underlying concerns. It was a delicate balancing act, and the weight of the situation was evident in their increasingly guarded statements to the press. Amidst the chaos, Emily tried to keep a low profile. She avoided interviews and declined invitations to speak at rallies, preferring to let her supporters handle the public-facing aspects of the movement. Privately, though, she was overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and solidarity. Friends stopped by her house to offer comfort, leaving baskets of baked goods and handwritten notes on her doorstep. Strangers sent letters and care packages, thanking her for reminding them of the power of compassion. Though she appreciated the gestures, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. She hadn't intended to spark a nationwide debate. She had simply wanted to help a man in pain. Now, her quiet act of kindness had become a rallying cry for change, a responsibility she wasn't sure she was ready to shoulder. As the days turned into weeks, it became clear that the story was far from over. The protests showed no signs of slowing down, and the online campaign continued to gain traction. Calls for reform extended beyond Emily's case, with advocates pushing for legislative changes to improve healthcare access for veterans. Meanwhile, Chuck Norris's involvement hinted at the possibility of further intervention, leaving the town and the nation eager to see what would happen next. What started as a single act of compassion had evolved into something much bigger, a movement that challenged people to rethink their priorities and ask themselves what truly mattered in life. Chuck Norris wasn't the kind of man who sat on the sidelines when he saw something wrong. Known for his larger-than-life persona, both on-screen and off, Norris had always been more than just a Hollywood star. He was a symbol of strength, integrity, and unwavering principles. But what made him stand out even more was his deep respect for those who served their country. Veterans weren't just another group to him. They were heroes, individuals who had sacrificed everything so others could live in freedom. When he heard about Emily's suspension, it struck a chord that resonated deeply within him. The next morning, Norris decided to visit the hospital unannounced. Dressed casually in jeans, boots, and a cowboy hat, he stepped out of his truck and walked toward the entrance. The sight of Chuck Norris walking into a small-town hospital was enough to turn heads. Nurses paused mid-step. Patients craned their necks, and even the receptionist at the front desk momentarily forgot what she was doing. Word spread quickly through the building. Chuck Norris is here. It wasn't every day that a legend walked through their doors and the buzz was palpable. Norris didn't come alone. He brought with him a quiet determination. He approached the front desk and asked politely to speak with someone from the hospital administration. When told they weren't expecting him, he simply smiled, a calm but firm expression that said he wasn't leaving until his request was granted. Within minutes, the hospital's director rushed down to meet him, visibly flustered by the unexpected arrival. Norris greeted him warmly, extending a handshake before getting straight to the point. "I'm here because I want to understand why a nurse got suspended for helping a veteran," he said, his tone steady and respectful but laced with authority. The director hesitated, clearly unprepared for this conversation. After a brief pause, he invited Norris into a private meeting room where other members of the hospital board were hastily summoned. As they filed in one by one, Norris took a seat at the head of the table, exuding an aura of confidence that commanded attention. His presence was magnetic, not intimidating but impossible to ignore. The board members exchanged nervous glances as they settled into their chairs, unsure of how to handle this unusual situation. Once everyone was seated, the director began explaining the hospital's position. He spoke about policies and procedures, emphasizing the importance of adhering to strict guidelines to ensure accountability and fairness. "We can't make exceptions," he argued, "even for good intentions. If we start bending rules, where do we draw the line?" Other board members nodded in agreement, chiming in with similar points. They talked about liability, legal risks, and the need to maintain consistency in decision-making. To them, it was a matter of principle. Rules existed for a reason, and breaking them, no matter how noble the motive, undermined the system as a whole. Norris listened intently, leaning forward slightly with his elbows resting on the table. His piercing gaze never wavered as each person spoke, absorbing every word without interrupting. When it was finally his turn to respond, he did so with characteristic poise. "I hear you," he began, his voice calm but deliberate. "Rules are important. No one's denying that. But let me ask you something. What's the purpose of all these rules? Isn't it to take care of people, to heal them, protect them, and give them hope?" The room fell silent. Norris continued, his words carrying the weight of conviction. "Harold Jenkins isn't just another patient. He's a veteran, a man who put his life on the line for this country. And when he came to your hospital in pain, desperate for help, what message did you send him by suspending the nurse who tried to ease his suffering? You're telling him, and everyone else, that paperwork matters more than humanity." His statement hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some avoiding eye contact while others glanced at each other nervously. Norris leaned back slightly, giving them a moment to process his words. Then, in a softer tone, he added, "You know, I've met a lot of veterans over the years. Some have lost limbs. Others carry invisible scars that haunt them every single day. What they all have in common is this: they gave up pieces of themselves so we could live in peace. Don't you think they deserve better than red tape and bureaucracy?" To drive his point home, Norris shared a personal story. He recounted meeting a young soldier named Jake during a charity event several years ago. Jake had returned from deployment with severe injuries, both physical and emotional. Despite his bravery, he struggled to adapt to civilian life, often feeling forgotten by the very system meant to support him. "Jake told me something I'll never forget," Norris said. He said, "Sir, I don't expect anyone to fix me. I just want to feel like I still matter." That's all Harold wanted too, to feel like he mattered. And Emily gave him that. She reminded him that there are still good people in this world who care. As Norris spoke, his passion was evident. This wasn't just rhetoric. It was heartfelt advocacy rooted in years of championing veterans' causes. The board members listened intently, their earlier arguments now sounding hollow in light of his perspective. One member cleared her throat and tentatively asked, "But what about precedent? If we let this slide, won't others expect the same leniency?" Norris nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging the concern. "That's a valid question," he admitted. "But here's the thing. Compassion shouldn't be seen as leniency. It should be the foundation of everything you do here. Yes, there need to be guidelines. But those guidelines should serve the greater purpose of healing, not hinder it. Maybe this is an opportunity for you to rethink how you approach cases like Harold's. Instead of punishing someone for showing kindness, why not create policies that empower your staff to act with empathy without fear of retribution?" His suggestion sparked a murmur of discussion among the board members. For the first time since the meeting began, they seemed genuinely engaged, wrestling with the implications of his words. Norris watched them carefully, sensing a shift in the room's energy. Though he hadn't come with demands or ultimatums, his presence alone had forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about their priorities. Before concluding the meeting, Norris made one final appeal. "I'm not asking you to change overnight," he said, "but I am asking you to consider the bigger picture. This isn't just about Emily. It's about the kind of legacy you want to leave behind. Do you want to be remembered as the hospital that stuck rigidly to its rules no matter the cost? Or do you want to be known as the place where compassion triumphed over bureaucracy? The choice is yours." With that, Norris stood up, thanked the board for their time, and left the room. As he walked back through the hospital corridors, the staff and patients who had gathered to catch a glimpse of him erupted into spontaneous applause. Norris tipped his hat graciously, offering smiles and nods as he made his way outside. Though he didn't know it yet, his intervention had planted a seed of change, one that would soon blossom into something far greater than anyone anticipated. The meeting with the hospital board had been intense, but Chuck Norris wasn't done yet. He knew that real change rarely happened behind closed doors. It required action, visibility, and a willingness to challenge the status quo in front of the world. As he stepped out of the hospital, Norris felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about exposing the cracks in a system that often prioritized procedure over people. And if anyone could shine a light on those cracks, it was him. That evening, Norris sat down at his laptop in the quiet comfort of his family home. Though he was known for his tough guy roles and martial arts prowess, he also understood the power of storytelling. Over the years, he'd used his platform to advocate for causes close to his heart, from veterans' rights to education reform. Now, as he typed out a heartfelt message about Emily's suspension, he drew on his experiences as both an entertainer and a humanitarian. His words were simple but powerful, crafted to resonate with ordinary people who might not have thought much about healthcare policies before now. In the post, Norris recounted what he had learned during his visit to the hospital. He described meeting members of the board, their arguments about rules and precedent, and how they struggled to reconcile policy with compassion. But rather than simply criticizing them, Norris framed the issue as a broader societal dilemma. "We live in a world where we're quick to point fingers and slow to extend grace," he wrote. "But here's the truth. Compassion isn't chaos. It's courage. Emily showed that courage when she chose to help Harold Jenkins, knowing the risks involved. Shouldn't we reward acts like hers instead of punishing them?" The post went live late that night, accompanied by a photo of Norris standing outside the hospital, tipping his hat to the crowd. Within minutes, it began to spread like wildfire. Fans shared it across social media platforms, tagging friends, family, and even local politicians. Comments poured in from all corners of the country, some praising Norris for taking a stand, others recounting their own frustrating encounters with rigid healthcare systems. One commenter, a retired nurse herself, wrote, "I've seen too many cases where patients fall through the cracks because no one wants to bend the rules. Thank you, Chuck, for reminding us why we got into this field in the first place." Morning, the story had exploded. News outlets picked up on Norris's involvement, running headlines like "Chuck Norris takes on hospital bureaucracy" and "Can compassion survive red tape?" Reporters flocked to the small Texas town, eager to capture interviews with Emily, Harold Jenkins and anyone else connected to the case. The national spotlight was suddenly shining brightly on a community that had previously flown under the radar. Meanwhile, Norris didn't stop at the online post. He reached out directly to influential figures, including lawmakers, veterans, organizations, and healthcare advocates. In phone calls and emails, he urged them to take action, not just for Emily's sake, but for the countless others caught in similar situations. "This is bigger than one nurse or one veteran," he told them. "It's about fixing a broken system that fails the very people it's supposed to protect." His appeals struck a chord, prompting several high-profile individuals to speak out in support of Emily and call for reforms. One of those individuals was Senator Maria Alvarez, a vocal advocate for veterans' health care. Inspired by Norris's efforts, she announced plans to introduce legislation aimed at improving access to medication and treatment for former service members. "What happened to Harold Jenkins shouldn't happen to anyone," she declared in a televised statement. "And what happened to Emily Carter shouldn't happen to any caregiver who puts their patients first. We need policies that reflect our values, not hinder them." As the days passed, the pressure on the hospital mounted. Protesters outside grew more organized, holding rallies and vigils that drew attention from neighboring towns. Local businesses continued to show their support, with some even donating portions of their profits to a fund set up for Emily's legal expenses. A group of veterans formed a motorcycle convoy, riding through the streets with banners that read, "Thank you, Emily, and compassion over compliance." Their presence added a layer of gravitas to the movement, underscoring the deep connection between the nurse's plight and the struggles faced by those she sought to help. Inside the hospital, tensions simmered. Staff members debated openly about whether the board's decision had been the right one. Some argued that sticking to protocol was non-negotiable, while others admitted privately that Emily's suspension felt wrong on a moral level. Patients chimed in too, sharing stories of times when nurses had gone above and beyond to make their stays more comfortable. Slowly but surely, the tide seemed to be turning, even within the institution itself. For Emily, the whirlwind of events was overwhelming. She hadn't expected her quiet act of kindness to spark such a massive response. At first, she tried to stay out of the limelight, declining interview requests and avoiding public appearances. But as the movement gained momentum, she realized she couldn't remain silent forever. With encouragement from friends and supporters, including Norris himself, she agreed to record a short video message. Sitting in her living room, surrounded by letters and drawings sent by well-wishers, Emily spoke candidly about her experience. "I never intended to cause trouble," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "All I wanted was to help someone who was hurting. Harold deserved better than what the system gave him, and I couldn't stand by and do nothing. If my suspension helps start a conversation about how we treat our veterans and each other, then maybe something good can come out of this." Her words resonated deeply, earning praise from viewers around the globe. Many saw her sincerity and humility as proof that true heroes weren't always the ones wearing capes. They were everyday people like Emily, willing to risk everything for the sake of another human being. Norris, watching the video from afar, felt a swell of pride. He had always believed in the power of individual actions to inspire collective change, and Emily's courage was proving his point beautifully. Still, he knew the fight wasn't over. Public opinion was shifting, but lasting reform would require more than hashtags and protests. It would take concrete action. To keep the momentum going, Norris decided to organize a town hall meeting in the small Texas town. Inviting everyone, from hospital staff and patients to local leaders and concerned citizens, he hoped to create a space where people could share their thoughts and ideas openly. Flyers were distributed, and announcements were made on local radio stations. By the time the event rolled around, hundreds of people packed into the community center, eager to participate. Standing at the podium, Norris opened the discussion with a simple question: how do we build a healthcare system that honors both its rules and its humanity? What followed was a passionate exchange of ideas, frustrations, and hopes. Nurses spoke about the challenges they faced daily, trying to balance empathy with compliance. Veterans shared their struggles with accessing care, highlighting gaps in the system that left them feeling abandoned. Ordinary citizens offered suggestions for improvement, ranging from policy changes to grassroots initiatives. By the end of the night, one thing was clear: the community was united in its desire for change. While opinions varied on how to achieve it, there was a shared understanding that the status quo was no longer acceptable. Norris concluded the meeting with a rallying cry: "Let's turn this moment into a movement. Let's demand better for our veterans, for our caregivers, and for ourselves." As the crowd dispersed, energized and hopeful, Norris couldn't help but feel optimistic. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but the seeds had been planted. And sometimes, all it took was one person, a compassionate nurse, a determined veteran, or even a legendary cowboy, to remind the world of what truly mattered. The town hall meeting marked a turning point, not just for Emily's case, but for the entire community. What had started as a local controversy had evolved into something much bigger, a movement driven by ordinary people determined to challenge the status quo. Chuck Norris's presence at the event had galvanized the crowd, infusing them with a sense of purpose and unity. But as the days turned into weeks, it became clear that the real work was only beginning. The energy from the town hall needed to translate into action if meaningful change was going to happen. Norris wasted no time in channeling that momentum. He reached out to his network of contacts: politicians, philanthropists, veterans advocates, and media personalities, to rally support for Emily and the broader cause she represented. His calls were met with enthusiasm, especially after the story continued to dominate headlines nationwide. Lawmakers who had previously been unaware of the systemic issues plaguing veterans' health care suddenly found themselves under pressure to act. Senator Maria Alvarez introduced her proposed legislation, titled the Compassionate Care Act, which aimed to streamline access to medications and treatments for veterans while protecting caregivers who acted in good faith. Public forums were held to gather input from stakeholders, ensuring that the bill addressed real-world challenges faced by those on the front lines. Meanwhile, Norris took a more personal approach. He visited Harold Jenkins, the veteran whose plight had sparked the entire chain of events. Sitting in Harold's modest home, surrounded by faded photographs of his military days, Norris listened intently as Harold recounted his struggles, not just with chronic pain, but with feeling forgotten by the system meant to support him. "It's not just about the meds," Harold said, his voice steady but tinged with sadness. "It's about knowing someone cares. When Emily helped me, she didn't just ease my pain. She reminded me I still mattered." Those words stayed with Norris long after he left Harold's house. They reinforced what he already knew. This fight wasn't just about policy changes or reversing one nurse's suspension. It was about restoring dignity and humanity to a process that too often reduced people to numbers on a form. Determined to amplify Harold's message, Norris recorded a video interview with him, sharing it online alongside a call to action. "Harold isn't alone," Norris said in the video. "There are thousands of veterans like him, struggling silently because they don't know where else to turn. We owe it to them and to ourselves to do better." The response was overwhelming. Veterans across the country began sharing their own stories, flooding social media with heartfelt posts about the barriers they faced in accessing care. Some talked about waiting months for appointments, only to be told they didn't qualify for certain treatments. Others described dealing with dismissive attitudes from healthcare providers who seemed more focused on ticking boxes than addressing their needs. These accounts painted a stark picture of a system in desperate need of reform, and inspired countless others to join the growing chorus of voices demanding change. Back in the small Texas town, the protests outside the hospital grew larger and more organized. Volunteers set up booths offering free coffee and snacks to demonstrators, while musicians performed acoustic sets to keep spirits high. Local schools got involved, with students creating artwork and essays honoring nurses, veterans, and the importance of compassion. Even businesses joined the effort, donating supplies and services to sustain the movement. The once divided community now stood united, bound together by a shared belief in justice and humanity. Inside the hospital, the atmosphere shifted noticeably. while the board members remained publicly committed to their initial decision regarding Emily. Cracks were beginning to show behind closed doors. Facing mounting public scrutiny and internal dissent among staff, they convened an emergency meeting to reassess their stance. For hours, they debated the pros and cons of reversing Emily's suspension, weighing the potential backlash against the growing demand for accountability. Finally, after much deliberation, they issued a statement announcing that Emily would be reinstated, but with conditions. The announcement came as bittersweet news to Emily herself. On one hand, she was relieved to be allowed back to work, eager to return to the patients who depended on her. On the other hand, the conditions imposed by the hospital felt like a slap in the face. She was required to attend mandatory ethics training, submit weekly reports detailing her use of hospital resources, and agree to never again deviate from protocol without explicit permission. To many observers, these stipulations seemed less like safeguards and more like punishment disguised as compromise. When Norris heard about the terms, he was furious, but not surprised. "They're trying to save face," he muttered during a phone call with Emily. "But don't let them take away your power. You've already won. You showed the world what real compassion looks like." Encouraged by his words, Emily decided to accept the conditions, viewing them as a necessary step toward rebuilding trust. Privately, though, she vowed to continue advocating for systemic changes that would prevent similar situations in the future. Norris doubled down on his efforts to ensure that Emily's reinstatement wasn't the end of the story. He partnered with veterans organizations to launch a national campaign called Care Without Compromise, designed to raise awareness about the challenges faced by both veterans and healthcare workers. Through fundraisers, educational workshops, and lobbying efforts, the initiative sought to bridge the gap between policy and practice, emphasizing the importance of empathy in every aspect of care. Norris also used his celebrity status to secure appearances on major talk shows, where he spoke passionately about the need for reform. One particularly memorable moment occurred during an interview on a popular morning show. Hosted by a well-known journalist known for her tough questions, the segment quickly turned into a masterclass in advocacy. When asked whether he thought the hospital's decision to reinstate Emily was enough, Norris didn't mince words. "No, it's not," he replied firmly. "Reinstating her is a start, but it doesn't fix the underlying problem. We can't keep expecting caregivers to choose between doing their jobs and doing what's right. That's not fair to them, and it's certainly not fair to the patients who rely on them." His candor struck a chord with viewers, sparking renewed calls for action. Thousands of people signed petitions urging Congress to pass the Compassionate Care Act, while others contacted their representatives directly to voice their support. The groundswell of activism put undeniable pressure on lawmakers, pushing the bill closer to becoming law. Meanwhile, hospitals across the country began reevaluating their own policies, recognizing the potential consequences of rigid adherence to rules at the expense of human connection. As the weeks went by, Emily gradually returned to her routine, resuming her duties with the same dedication that had defined her career. Patients greeted her warmly, grateful to have her back, while colleagues expressed admiration for her resilience. Yet despite the outward appearance of normalcy, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that her life and her perspective had fundamentally changed. She had gone from being an ordinary nurse to a symbol of resistance, a role she hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. With Norris's encouragement, Emily embraced her newfound platform, speaking at conferences and community events about the importance of balancing compassion with compliance. Her speeches were candid and heartfelt, drawing on her experiences to inspire others to advocate for change within their own spheres. "I didn't set out to make waves," she often said. "I just wanted to help someone who was hurting. But if my story can shine a light on the bigger issues, then maybe all of this will have been worth it." By the time autumn arrived, the small Texas town had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. The protests had subsided, replaced by ongoing efforts to implement reforms at the local level. The hospital board, finally acknowledging the need for change, established a task force dedicated to reviewing and revising its policies. And Emily, once suspended for her act of kindness, had become a beacon of hope, not just for her community, but for anyone fighting to make the world a little kinder. For Chuck Norris, the experience reinforced his belief in the power of collective action. As he reflected on the journey, from walking into the hospital unannounced to watching a movement take shape, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. "Change starts with one person," he wrote in a final post about the case. "But it grows when we come together, stand firm, and refuse to settle for anything less than justice and compassion. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning." The weeks following Emily's reinstatement brought a wave of change that no one in the small Texas town, or even Chuck Norris himself, could have fully anticipated. What had started as a quiet act of kindness by a single nurse had grown into a nationwide movement, challenging not just one hospital's policies but an entire system's approach to care. The story of Emily Carter and Harold Jenkins became more than just headlines. It became a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of compassion. The hospital, once stubbornly resistant to criticism, began taking tangible steps toward reform. Under mounting public pressure, and with Senator Maria Alvarez's Compassionate Care Act gaining traction in Congress, the board announced plans to create a new position, a patient advocate tasked specifically with addressing cases where rigid policies clashed with individual needs. This role would serve as a bridge between caregivers and administrators, ensuring that decisions were made with both empathy and accountability in mind. Additionally, the hospital launched a training program focused on teaching staff how to navigate ethical dilemmas without compromising their integrity or breaking rules unnecessarily. These initiatives signaled a shift in priorities, placing humanity at the forefront of healthcare delivery. Emily, now back at work, found herself at the center of these changes. Though she initially felt uneasy about being singled out, she soon embraced her role as a voice for reform. With encouragement from Norris and other supporters, she joined the hospital's newly formed task force, contributing insights based on her first-hand experiences. Her input proved invaluable, helping to shape policies that balanced structure with flexibility. For example, the task force introduced a streamlined process for handling emergency medication requests, allowing nurses to provide critical care without fear of retribution, as long as they documented their actions thoroughly and sought approval retroactively. Outside the hospital walls, the ripple effects of the movement continued to spread. Veterans organizations reported a surge in donations and volunteer sign-ups, as people inspired by Emily's story sought ways to give back to those who had served. Local businesses partnered with nonprofits to host job fairs, health screenings, and resource drives tailored to veterans' unique needs. Schools incorporated lessons about civic responsibility and empathy into their curricula, using Emily's case as a real-world example of standing up for what's right. Even children got involved, writing letters of gratitude to veterans and organizing fundraising events to support military families. Chuck Norris remained deeply engaged in the effort, leveraging his influence to keep the momentum alive. He traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, visiting veteran centers, and meeting with lawmakers to push for broader systemic reforms. His message was simple, yet powerful. We owe our heroes more than lip service. We owe them action. During one particularly moving event, he stood alongside Harold Jenkins, presenting him with a certificate of appreciation on behalf of the community. As the two men shook hands, the audience erupted into applause, a testament to how far they'd come since that fateful night in the emergency room. Harold, too, experienced a transformation. Encouraged by the outpouring of support, he began sharing his story more openly, becoming an advocate for fellow veterans struggling to access care. He joined a local support group, where he connected with others who understood his pain and frustration. Slowly but surely, he regained a sense of purpose, channeling his energy into helping others navigate the complexities of the healthcare system. "I used to think I was alone," he said during a speech at a veterans gala. "But thanks to people like Emily and Chuck, I know now that there are good folks out there fighting for us, and that gives me hope." As the months passed, the impact of the movement extended beyond Texas, inspiring similar efforts in other states. Hospitals nationwide began reviewing their protocols, implementing changes designed to prioritize compassion over bureaucracy. Lawmakers cited Emily's case when drafting legislation aimed at improving healthcare access for underserved populations. Even medical schools took notice, incorporating discussions about ethics and empathy into their training programs to prepare future generations of caregivers. For Emily, life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy, but it was a different kind of normalcy. She carried herself with newfound confidence, knowing that her actions had sparked meaningful change. Patients often stopped her in the hallways to thank her, not just for her care, but for reminding them that kindness still mattered. Colleagues looked to her as a leader, someone who embodied the values they all aspired to uphold. And though she occasionally felt overwhelmed by the weight of her newfound role, she reminded herself of Norris's words. "You've already won. You showed the world what real compassion looks like." In December, the town held a special ceremony to honor Emily and everyone else who had contributed to the movement. Hundreds of people gathered in the park, where a mural depicting Emily, Harold, and Norris was unveiled. Painted by local artists, the vibrant artwork captured the essence of the story. A nurse reaching out to a veteran with Norris standing nearby as a guardian figure. Beneath the mural, a plaque read, "Dedicated to those who remind us that compassion is the truest form of courage." During the ceremony, Norris delivered a heartfelt speech that brought many in the crowd to tears. "This journey has taught me something important," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Change doesn't happen because of one person, it happens because of all of us. It takes courage to stand up, to speak out, and to demand better. But most of all, it takes compassion, to see someone else's pain and say, 'I'm here for you.' That's what Emily did, and that's why we're here today." As the sun set over the park, casting golden light on the faces of those gathered, it was clear that this wasn't just the end of a chapter, it was the beginning of something greater. The story of Emily Carter, Harold Jenkins, and Chuck Norris had ignited a spark that refused to fade. It reminded everyone involved, and countless others watching from afar, that even in a world often dominated by rules and red tape, there was still room for humanity. And sometimes, all it took was one act of kindness to remind us of that truth.